We've all been captivated by stories of animals that don't exist, from unicorns and dragons to Bigfoot and the chupacabra. But it's easy to forget just how unbelievable some of Earth's 8.7 million species are, from rude-looking reptiles and fish with see-through heads to an underwater woodlouse bigger than newborn babies. Forget about all those bogus beasts from storybooks, and let's embark on a virtual safari of animals that you won't believe are real. Hooded seals. At first glance, hooded seals look like any other member of the fin-footed seal family. But during mating season, the males reveal a mind-blowing secret. Or at least nose-blowing. When trying to attract a mate, the male will stomach-churningly inflate the hood of his forehead before pushing a blood-red sac out of his nose. This elasticated membrane inflates when the seal blocks off one nostril and pushes air into the other, appearing bright red thanks to all the blood flowing through it. As the male waves his inflated sac around like an excited kid with a balloon, the display, ironically, signals just how big and powerful he is. So, the bigger the balloon, the better his chances of impressing a female. Looks like I've been trying to get girls the wrong way all these years. However, the male can also use it to square off against other enormous seals that can weigh up to 880 pounds during breeding season. When this happens, the male who displays the biggest, bulge wins the female, saving them the energy of a physical confrontation. Although if human males try to fight over a girl like this, I dread to think what might happen. Rosie maple moth. Believe it or not, there is a creature in the wilds of North America that looks more like a cartoon than a real-life animal. This bright pink and yellow winged thing is called the Rosie maple moth. It's a species that belongs to the great silk moth family, but I'd say it looks more like a winged version of Dee Dee from Dexter's Lab. While its cartoonish color patterning doesn't seem like the best choice of camouflage, this moth has a secret hidden up its furry sleeves. Endemic to Northeast America, these pastel-colored cuties like to nest in maple trees, the winged fruits of which have a similar pink and yellow color scheme to them. So it can perch among the branches without having to worry about becoming a delicious-looking snack for a nearby predator. Although I do wonder if it tastes as sweet as it looks. Giant isopod. When most of us think of isopods like woodlouse or pillbugs, we imagine tiny insect-like creatures, usually no bigger than a $50 coin. And that's where the existence of the giant isopod defies all manner of imagination. Living up to 7,000 feet beneath the waves, these underwater isopods exhibit varying degrees of deep-sea gigantism. That means the deeper they live, the bigger they can grow, with some specimens measuring up to a staggering 2.5 feet long. The freaky phenomenon has left scientists scratching their heads for decades. One prominent theory claims that cooler temperatures, like those at the bottom of the ocean, encourage animals to grow larger as they radiate less heat. However, another theory argues that large animals have a lower metabolism, meaning they've evolved to adapt to the lack of food on the ocean floor. Whatever the reason, watching these overgrown wood lice scuttle along the ocean floor is still one huge nightmare. But thankfully, they only look menacing. That's because giant isopods are scavengers. Rather than hunting down prey with those creepy-looking claws, these carnivorous crustaceans wait for food to float down from above in a flurry of so-called marine snow. It's like they're constantly waiting on a deep-sea Deliveroo. On the rare occasion that there's enough food to gorge themselves on, they can eat so much that they inhibit their otherwise graceful movements. In the same way I can inhibit my graceful movements when I eat too much of my mother's lasagna. Vampire deer. Deer are beautiful, majestic creatures that inspire a sense of awe in any lucky onlookers. But there's one member of the deer family that's a lot less awe and a lot more Instead of growing regal-looking antlers, water deer grow huge, terrifying fangs instead. Although you might imagine these fanged fiends leaping around at night trying to nibble on the necks of unsuspecting victims, the reality is a little more reassuring. Water deer are completely herbivorous, and males use these fangs like antlers to compete for mates and territory. And their vicious appearance doesn't seem so threatening when you realize that they only stand about 2 feet tall. According to Jen Webb, Zoo Atlanta's carnivore keeper, the ancestor of all deer were small and had both tusks and antlers. But as they evolved, the larger of the species developed larger antlers and lost their fangs, while smaller deer kept their tiny tusks. Either way, this is going to make for one very freaky Bambi prequel. Featherstar. There are plenty of weird and wonderful things swimming around in the ocean, but the Featherstar looks like it's been plucked straight from the pages of a children's book. As a member of the crinoid family, which includes sea stars and sea urchins, they begin their lives attached to the seafloor by a stalk. At this stage, they're called sea lilies. But if their stem is broken, they become fluttering feather stars, using their fringed appendages to swim freely under the waves, almost like a sentient pom-pom. Although not all species of featherstar can swim, scientists believe this evolutionary response helped them escape from predators. And, perhaps more impressively, they also discovered that featherstars can fully regenerate any lost limbs. They can grow up to 150 of their feathery arms, which can reach up to a foot long. But should one be severed, it'll slowly grow back at a rate just shy of a millimeter a day. And providing their central disc, called a central dorsal, is intact, there's no limit to how many times those arms can grow back. So, theoretically, these mesmerizing sea creatures could keep on swimming forever, although they must get tired at some point, right? Eye. Lemurs are famously cute, cuddly-looking species native to the island of Madagascar. But there's one drastic exception to the rule. Meet the eye, a primate that doesn't just look like it evolved in a different way, but on a different planet. It sports rodent-like teeth that never stop growing, piercing eyes that see in the dark, and a skeletally thin middle finger that looks like a spider leg. It's also the only primate in the world that relies on echolocation to find food. Kind of like a dolphin, if a dolphin was small, furry, and downright terrifying. Using that long, bony finger, the eye taps on branches before using those massive ears to detect the reverberations of grubs scuttling around the inside. If it hears one, it'll rip open the branch with a powerful bite, which is so strong that it can chew through concrete. Then, it uses that hideously dexterous middle finger, which has its own ball and socket joint like a freakishly tiny shoulder, to fish out the grubs. While this spine-tingling display makes many people shudder, the eye clearly doesn't care. In fact, it's giving the world the middle finger. And speaking of freakish fingers, why don't you use yours to move that mouse over those like and subscribe buttons? With just 2 clicks, you'll be the first to know when I release new videos covering even more mind-blowing facts or sensational stories. All done? Great! Now let's take a look at even more animals that you won't believe exist. Maned wolf. From the shoulders up, the maned wolf that prowls the South American savannas looks like any other crafty canine. But once it steps out of the tall grass, it looks like someone just glued a fox onto some stilts. Standing around 3 feet at the shoulder, about hip height on most people, the unbelievably long legs of this weird wolf raise up the main bulk of its body. While it looks like an evolutionary joke, scientists theorize that their height makes prey easier to see and catch in the tall grasses of the South American savannas. Even so, it doesn't really look like any kind of wolf you've ever seen before, because, despite its name, it's not a wolf at all. The puzzling mixture of its anatomical oddities, like long legs, bright red fur, and wolfish body, make it a unique and distinct species called Chrysocyon. So, while it's still a member of the canid family, it looks more like someone mashed a fox and a wolf together and gave it a few rounds through a taffy puller. Worm lizards. Look, down on the ground! It's a worm! It's a lizard! No, it's a worm lizard? Seems like Mother Nature couldn't decide if this Pepto-Bismol-colored creature was going to be a lizard or an earthworm, so settled for something in between. Known as the bipes from the amphibinid family, this goofy-looking reptile's long body has the light pink ribbing of a worm combined with the beady little eyes and jaws of a lizard. But its strangest feature by far are the two funny-looking front limbs attached to its 10-inch long body. Found across the Mexican Baja Desert, it's also earned itself the hilarious title of the Mexican mole lizard because of how it uses those stumpy little legs. Just like a mole, it shovels sand and soil out of its way and buries itself underground in a kind of subterranean bunker. There it stays to escape the heat of the desert sun, only emerging on the surface when it's much cooler. Although the verdict is still out on whether it technically slithers or crawls its way around. What do you think? Long-beaked echidna. With spines like a hedgehog, a fleshy beak, and the ability to lay eggs like a reptile, this wacky mammal sounds like it's been made up by a child. But far from being a Crayola drawing stuck on a fridge, the long-beaked echidna is weirdly real. That long, fleshy beak it gets its name from is comprised of a single bony tube. It feeds by sucking hard at the ground and slurping up soft invertebrates like earthworms, a bit like a kid messily slurping up spaghetti. Except, unlike a child, it has electroreceptors in its beak that can detect the faintest electrical fields produced by its underground prey. Think that sounds weird? Well, that's just the start. As I already mentioned, despite technically being a mammal, this spiny sucker actually lays eggs. When those eggs hatch, the echidna will incubate them in a pouch, just like a kangaroo. But unlike a kangaroo, it'll feed those babies, adorably known as puggles, through a series of milk patches. Not teats, patches. Through special glands in their pouches, milk oozes out of its skin for the baby to suck up through its own bizarre little beak. Man, if a kid did dream this thing up with a pack of crayons, I'd have some serious questions about their sanity. Bryozoans. In rivers and lakes around the world, these mysterious brain-like blobs can be found living in murky waters. Although they look like mounds of moldy jello, they're more alive than you might think. You see, these lifeless gelatinous lumps are actually living colonies called magnificent bryozoans, while the individual animals they're made up of, called zooids, only grow to about 1/25th of an inch in length. They cluster together to form colonies as large as 4 feet in diameter. Banding together like this means they can find food more easily in the water, usually in the form of algae or other organic material. But the way they eat might turn your stomach, because they each only have one opening that serves as both their mouth and their, poop chute. Using tiny, hair-like tentacles around the opening, they gently push food down their gut. To excrete, it's the same but in reverse. So if you ever spot one of these in the water, you might want to think twice about picking it up. That water's brown for a reason. Sops. Although these mysterious balls of goo look like they've been forced into a fish-shaped mold, you might be surprised to learn that they're taxonomically closer to humans than jellyfish. That's because these semi-transparent sea creatures, called Sops, are members of an animal group known as sea squirts, or tunicata. They all have a supporting notochord, a bit like a backbone, running through them to protect their central nerve cord. Despite their floppy, jelly-like appearance, this crucial attribute makes them some of the closest living relatives to vertebrates. However, if you catch a glimpse of them underwater, you might just realize how different they really are. As you can see, Sops form these unbelievable underwater chain colonies as part of their reproductive cycle. They're created when a single solitary Sop asexually buds off clones of itself, with each one growing so fast they increase in length by 10% every hour. different variants can range in size from a few millimeters to almost 4 inches, meaning the chains they form can measure up to 15 feet. These bizarre living jelly ropes can twist and spiral in the water, which is a pretty amazing feat for an animal with no bones. Pyrosomes. Sops aren't the only boneless animal that look impossibly impressive underwater. If you want proof, just take a look at the alien-esque form of this enormous pyrosome. Pyrosomes are free-floating colonies of zooids, kind of like the Bryozoans. They're all connected by shared tissue, like some sort of gelatinous tunic, which they use to communicate and coordinate their movements. As each individual zooid filters the ocean water for food, they expel the filtered water into the colonial cylindrical body. With enough water being pushed out, like using thousands of tiny motors all at once, the colony propels forward. These colonies can range in size from just a few centimeters to 60 feet long, with openings wide enough for a human to swim through and bodies big enough to ride. They increase in size through asexual reproduction, meaning they create identical clones of themselves to expand their gigantic worm-like structure. And like that wasn't weird enough, they also glow. The name pyrosome literally means fire body in Greek because they emit a bizarre bioluminescent light that can be seen more than 100 feet away. Scientists think it may be to ward off predators or communicate with other colonies, although it remains something of a mystery. Do you guys have any ideas? Let me know. Echidna acelti. Before you ask, no, scientists didn't discover this animal on Tinder. This, unfortunate-looking creature is called the Echidna acelti, although its, a suggestive appearance has earned it the hysterical nickname of the Manaconda. This phallic fiend is actually a type of Sicilian, which are a group of blind, snake-like amphibians that look more like worms than reptiles. However, the Manaconda has a few unique traits. For a start, it's the only lungless species of Sicilian known to man, meaning it breathes via a gas exchange in its skin. And secondly, its flat skull and enlarged mouth look like they were plucked straight out of my worst nightmares. But what it lacks in beauty, it makes up for in length, as some variants have been found to measure up to 31.7 inches. Now, I know size isn't everything, but I can't help but feel a little jealous. Mary River Turtle. Back in 2018, this unbelievable image of a tiny turtle sporting one hell of a mohawk took the internet by storm. But it turns out the vivid green hair isn't the strangest thing about this rebellious-looking reptile. It's called the Mary River Turtle, an endangered species native to Australia that has the unique ability to breathe through its, genitalia. Using specialized glands near its cloaca, an organ used for both excretion and mating, it can stay submerged in water for anywhere up to 72 hours. Because they spend so much time under the water, algae can start to grow on their shell, head, and other body parts, which is where that hilarious green hairdo comes from. Okay, so the hair may be fake, but is there anything more punk than breathing through your own butt? The Yeti Crab. At first glance, you might think this crab pinched some poor raver's shaggy leg warmers. But this is in fact the Yeti Crab, a name that comes from its white, hairy appearance which resembles the legendary Yeti snow monster. But there's nothing monstrous about this crab, considering it reaches around 6 inches in size. It lives in almost freezing ocean depths, around 7,800 feet below the waves, but its fantastic white fur isn't designed to keep it warm. Scientists speculate that these little crabs use the hairy bristles on their arms to harvest bacteria. By clambering over hydrothermal vents in the ocean floor, they use the warm, rising waters to cultivate nutritious microbes. This means they'll have a constant food supply within arm's reach. A little bit like me during lockdown. Finally, I have found my spirit animal. The Great Potu. With its freakishly gigantic eyes and creepily open smile, it's hard to tell if this is a bird or a demonic muppet. It may look like a shelled design for an R-rated Jim Henson creation, but this feathery fiend is in fact tropical America's great potu bird. At just 23 inches tall, this nocturnal creature has developed huge, bulging eyes to spot flying insects in the dark, along with a massive mouth to help catch them. However, when exposed to light, their irises shrink dramatically, making them look either incredibly cute or utterly deranged. Their ominous orbs also have a narrow slit along the bottom of their eyelids, allowing them to sense movement even when their eyes are closed. This means when they sleep during the day, while expertly camouflaging themselves as tree stumps, they can detect any approaching predators. I guess there really is no rest for the wicked, or the wicked-looking at least. Fire snail. If regular snails celebrated Halloween, they'd probably go trick-or-treating looking like this. Except that's no costume, because these are the true-to-life colors of the fire snail. With its huge black shell growing up to 2.7 inches in diameter and bright red foot measuring up to 11.8 inches, they're big enough to make a grown man scream. With their vampiric color scheme, they look like they'd leave a trail of blood rather than slime. But in reality, these crazy colored mollusks are no different to your garden variety snail. Well, almost no different. It's a species native to the cloud forest of the Cameron Highlands in Malaysia, which has a very cool and humid temperature that allows this melanoid mollusk to thrive. Because these specific conditions are almost impossible to emulate, the snails are notoriously hard to keep alive outside of their natural habitat. So sorry to all the goths out there who are hoping to get one as a pet. Go write some sad poetry about it or something. Blue dragon. Dragons are mythical beings that only exist in children's stories and nerdy role-playing games, right? Wrong. These extraordinarily embellished predators are known as blue dragons, although their scientific and much less cool name is Glaucus atlanticus. And despite its majestic appearance, this brilliantly colored creature is actually a species of small pelagic sea slug. Growing to a maximum of just 1.2 inches in length, these tiny slugs float along ocean currents by swallowing air and holding it in a specialized gas sac in their stomachs. But as pretty as they look, you don't want to go scooping these out of the water. You see, blue dragons are the predators of other pelagic creatures, including the deadly Portuguese man-o'-war and other venomous siphonophores. Once they've chowed down on their poisonous prey, they recycle their nematocysts that give the siphonophores their dangerous stings and store them in their finger like serrata. So if you pick one up, you might receive a deadly sting. While it's not exactly breathing fire, I guess they do have a little bit of dragon in them after all. Cratinitus moth. Ever wondered what would happen if Satan had been allowed to create an animal? Well, the answer would probably look something like the Cratinitus moth. Those terrifying tentacles protruding from its abdomen may look like something out of a bad dream, though I'm sorry to tell you that this thing is completely real. But it's not as bad as it looks. For start, the moth only has a wingspan of about 1.5 inches, which is about half the size of your thumb. Despite its less than appealing appearance, those menacing tentacles aren't used to feed on your soul. They're known as cormata, which are scent organs that the moth inflates to produce pheromones when trying to attract a mate. Well, it doesn't seem so scary now, although I still vote that we send it back to hell where it clearly belongs. Macropena microstoma. A fish with a transparent head may sound like something straight out of science fiction, but in the deep, dark waters of the Pacific Ocean, it's very much alive and swimming. The Macropena microstoma, more commonly known as the barrel eye fish, gets its nickname from the tubular set of eyes embedded within its transparent head. That's right. Its eyes aren't the dark capsules you see at the front, but the large green orbs glinting inside that fluid-filled shield. As unusual as this physical trait seems, it's actually a clever hunting tool. You see, the barrel eye lives around 2,000 to 2,600 feet below the waves, so it's constantly swimming through pitch-black waters. To catch a decent meal in these abyssal conditions, its sensitive, tubular eyes are angled upwards through its head. This means it can spot the faintest silhouette of prey floating above and ambush it from below. While this makes it sound like a terrifying deep-sea predator, the barrel eye is only about 6 inches long, so the only thing you'd risk losing to this fish is a staring contest. Which of these unbelievable animals do you think looks the most made up? And have you been lucky enough to see any of them up close? Let me know down in the comments below. And thanks for watching.